2025 season. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix has officially become part of racing folklore. The dust has settled over Jeddah's rapid-fire street circuit, and with it, the second round of the 2025 Formula One season has etched its name into the sport's increasingly unpredictable history books. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was more than just another race. It was a pressure cooker of shifting dynamics, controversial calls, aggressive battles, and individual performances that might just redefine the landscape of this year's championship. Over 50 laps of calculated madness, position changes occurred in 18 of the 20 grid spots, and while the race lacked some of the chaos or strategic curveballs that typically define these events, the action that did unfold was nothing short of consequential. This was a weekend of revelations, of confirmations, and, perhaps, of coronations. Oscar Piastri has taken the lead in the Drivers' Championship for the very first time in his blossoming F1 career. Not just a leader on points, but a statement maker. A driver who arrived in Saudi Arabia with questions hovering above him, and who left having silenced most of them with a masterful, cold-blooded performance that will have rippled through the paddock. The Australian delivered a surgical drive. Clinical, efficient, confident, and above all, fearless. From the moment the red lights blinked off, Piastri was locked in. His reaction to the start was electric, a textbook getaway that saw him blast past Verstappen into Turn 1 with the kind of authority that suggests this won't be a one-off. The Dutchman, desperate not to lose control of the race from the very beginning, attempted to retain the position by running wide and rejoining ahead of Piastri. It was a bold move, but one that cost him dearly. The stewards hit him with a 5-second penalty, setting the tone for what was to come. Piastri, undeterred, remained glued to the rear wing of the Red Bull. With no safety cars, no red flags, and minimal degradation, there was very little in the way of strategic variation. He needed to stay close, wait for clean air, and execute when it mattered most. And he did exactly that. Despite facing increased tire wear from running in dirty air during the first stint, something both he and the MCL39 strongly dislike, he held firm. Once the first round of stops came, he found the breathing room he needed and began to stretch his legs. What followed was a string of bold but precise overtakes, including a particularly thrilling move on Lewis Hamilton that ensured he would not be stuck behind slower cars for long. Piastri didn't just take the lead, he seized it and never looked back. Crossing the finish line with nearly 3 seconds to spare over Verstappen, Oscar made a definitive statement. This wasn't handed to him. He earned every inch of track position, every tenth of a second, every accolade. And now, he stands at the top of the standings. What we're seeing now is not just talent finally blooming, but the arrival of a contender. While Piastri soared, Lando Norris stumbled. A costly mistake in qualifying left the Briton stranded in P10, forcing McLaren to deploy an alternate strategy starting on the hard compound tires. It was a gamble, and one that never really paid off. Norris struggled to find rhythm in traffic and seemed uncomfortable in the thick of battle. The McLaren wasn't notably faster than its competitors, and Lando's hesitations in combat were evident. His duel with Hamilton showcased the issue perfectly. The 7-time world champion toyed with him over multiple laps, holding him back without breaking a sweat. While Norris eventually found a way through, the delay cost him critical time. It was symptomatic of a wider issue. When faced with adversity, Norris too often becomes tentative. He would finish fourth, close to the podium but never really in the fight for it. Worse still, he's now tied on points with Verstappen, and Piastri has left them both behind. Internally, this race may represent a psychological blow for Lando. Not only did he lose ground in the title fight, but he did so while being outclassed by his own teammate. The contrast between the two McLaren drivers could not have been starker. On one side, a driver in total command of his destiny. On the other, one looking increasingly unsure of his. And then there's Verstappen. The Dutchman fought like a man possessed. He pushed hard from the outset, opening a gap to Piastri even with the looming penalty. He was relentless, stringing together qualifying level laps in race conditions, attempting to break free from the DRS zone and dictate the pace. During the second stint, he used backmarkers as tools, slicing past them and edging closer to the McLaren in front, hoping to mount a late challenge. But he had been boxed in by his own error at turn 1. The stewards deemed that he had gained an unfair advantage by going off track at the start, and while Verstappen and his fans may dispute the penalty, the reality is hard to argue. Oscar did leave enough space for a side-by-side entry into the corner, and Max didn't even attempt to make the turn cleanly. Instead, he braked late, released the pedal, and ran wide in what felt like a calculated gamble. Had he executed the corner correctly, both drivers would have emerged fairly. But he didn't. And the punishment, in context, was justified. Could the FIA have handled it differently? Perhaps. They could have instructed him to give the place back immediately. But they didn't, and instead imposed the 5-second penalty. From that point on, Max's race was about survival and attack. He pushed, clawed, and burned through his tires to close the gap, ultimately finishing just under 3 seconds behind Oscar. Without the penalty, he would have won. But racing isn't about hypotheticals. It's about decisions in real time. And this time, he came up short. As for the minor controversies surrounding Norris's pit exit, some claimed he crossed the white line. But by the letter of the law, there's no evidence he completely breached the boundary. Since 2022, the rule has been clear. You must fully cross the white line with at least one tire to be penalized. Nothing from the onboard footage or exterior shots showed this to be the case. And even if he had been penalized, it wouldn't have affected the outcome, with George Russell finishing far behind. What this race delivered wasn't chaos or spectacle in the traditional sense. It was something more subtle, but perhaps more powerful. It was a clear shift in the competitive balance. A clear indication that Oscar Piastri is no longer the quiet student in the McLaren garage. He's the professor now. He's not just winning races. He's dictating them. Every lap. Every move. Every statement on track. And in doing so, he didn't just win in Jeddah. He may have changed the course of the championship. That powerful display from Red Bull offers a much-needed glimmer of hope within the team after implementing some of the first technical updates of the season. With even more upgrades on the way, the Austrian outfit is looking to regain full control over a championship that, at times, seems to be slipping from their grasp. That said, it's important to acknowledge that the Jeddah circuit inherently suits the characteristics of the RB21. Whether that performance holds steady in upcoming races like Miami or Imola remains to be seen. If not, we could see a repeat of the struggles they faced just days ago under the Bahrain lights, a stark reminder of how volatile and inconsistent this car currently is. The RB21 seems to swing violently between extremes, brilliant one weekend, baffling the next. Unless Red Bull can iron out this inconsistency, their grip on the title will continue to loosen. Still, they've bought themselves some time. And in Formula One, time is everything. Max Verstappen, now level on points with Lando Norris, remains an ever-present threat. You can never count him out. Even when he's behind, he's never gone. As for Yuki Tsunoda, his day was over almost as soon as it began. Caught in the chaos of the midfield during the opening lap, he was involved in an incident with Pierre Gasly. The blame, fairly and quietly, rested on the Japanese driver's shoulders. Still, it was treated as a racing incident, rightfully, in my opinion, even though the consequences were severe for both. Just another reminder of the razor's edge nature of street circuits. There were no positives to salvage from his weekend. Now, if there was a driver who truly stood out, who left everything on the track, it was Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque driver gave a scintillating performance, starting with impeccable tire management on the medium compound in his first stint. Knowing that overtaking on equal terms at Jeddah is nearly impossible, he waited patiently for clean air to finally unleash the real pace of the SF25. A pace that had briefly appeared in Friday's practice but remained hidden since. This clever and disciplined approach allowed Ferrari to pivot their strategy and give him a fresh tire advantage in the second stint. Leclerc didn't waste it. He attacked aggressively and clinically, most notably with a decisive overtake on George Russell, before slowly reeling in Max Verstappen. Though he never truly threatened the Dutchman, he remained comfortably ahead of Norris, who was chasing with newer, softer rubber. The result? Ferrari's first podium of the year after 50 thrilling laps. More than just a strong result, it was a statement about Leclerc's evolution as a driver. He's matured. He's calculating. And he's absolutely dialed in. As for the car, the SF25 has hidden depth, much more than what we saw in qualifying, where one-lap pace limitations at Jeddah kept Ferrari out of true contention for pole. Unlocking its full potential remains a challenge, especially on circuits like this, but there's hope for the near future. Urgent progress is still required, though. They cannot afford to keep letting points slip away. Further back, Lewis Hamilton managed to hold on to 7th place. He overtook Carlos Sainz but was later passed by Norris. Though he improved his pace compared to Saturday and slightly narrowed the performance gap to Leclerc, the difference remained massive, finishing over 25 seconds behind his teammate. It was a grueling weekend for the 7-time champion, plagued by persistent tire temperature issues and an inability to feel at one with the SF25. Now comes a much-needed break before the Miami Grand Prix. But when the circus resumes, both Hamilton and the Mercedes camp will need to return with a radically different approach. As a unit, they lacked race day strength. Russell in particular struggled, battling extreme tire overheating issues, an absolutely critical factor in today's race. He tumbled off the podium after losing out to both Leclerc and Norris. His pace dropped so drastically that, in the closing laps, he was lapping over a second slower than Andrea Kimi Antonelli. The only reason he managed to cling to 5th place was thanks to the buffer he had built earlier in the race. But the final result came with a sour taste. Antonelli had a more stable race overall. While he didn't match Russell's peak pace, he kept things clean and consistent. He eventually lost position to Norris but held Hamilton at bay with authority. It was a quiet but solid showing for the Italian rookie, a performance that hints at greater things once the European leg of the calendar kicks off. As for Mercedes, they now have their first real dossier of the W16's weaknesses. The car showed its soft spots under heat and pressure, but with fresh parts scheduled for the next events, this could mark the beginning of the team's first true push for the front. The time to go into attack mode is now. Meanwhile, Carlos Sainz delivered a gritty, no-nonsense race for Williams. Despite a painfully slow pit stop of over 6 seconds and inevitable losses to the likes of Hamilton and Norris, he held his ground admirably. What truly stood out, however, was his unselfish teamwork. In a move reminiscent of Singapore 2023, Sainz provided DRS to teammate Alex Albon in a strategic effort to fend off Hadjar, who was closing in fast with significantly fresher soft tires. The plan worked to perfection. Albon and Sainz, in coordinated fashion, kept the Racing Bulls driver at bay. After the race, team principal James Bowles was visibly emotional, grateful for the collaboration that earned Williams a double points finish and catapulted them into 5th place in the constructors' standings. It was a tangible sign of the team's growing strength. The FW47, while not flawless, is one of the most well-rounded cars in the midfield. It doesn't have glaring weaknesses, and that's more than can be said for many of its rivals. In contrast, the Racing Bulls VCAR02 only really came alive with a heavy fuel load and on an alternate strategy. While the car's underlying pace was hard to spot early on, their late-race competitiveness surged dramatically. Still, the earlier laps cost them, and the teamwork from Williams neutralized their final charge. All in all, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix may not have had the fireworks of a chaotic race, but its implications are far-reaching. Red Bull is under pressure. Ferrari is awakening. Mercedes is unraveling and rebuilding. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Oscar Piastri might just be writing a new chapter in the sport's evolving narrative. Isaac Hadjar came out of the gates like a cannonball. Starting on the hard compound tires, he capitalized on the early laps to gain 4 positions straight off the start, launching into a spirited, though ultimately unsuccessful, chase of the 2 Williams cars. First with the hard tire and later with fresh mediums, Hadjar seemed poised to lead the midfield pack. His pace was strong, maybe even stronger than the blue and white cars ahead, but Williams played a perfect hand with both drivers. They coordinated flawlessly, using teamwork and track positioning to keep the Red Bull Junior behind. It was a masterclass in how having both cars in the fight can shape the outcome of a race. Under these specific conditions, unity beat raw speed. Still, Hadjar salvaged a valuable point in a weekend that, much like in Bahrain, had started in gloom. Things didn't go as well for his teammate. Liam Lawson had a muted race. A poor start saw him fail to capitalize on the chaos, getting bottled up in traffic and losing precious time. Stuck behind slower cars and unable to make the progress he needed, his race unraveled early. After his first stop, things only got worse. In his bid to climb back up the field, Lawson made a clumsy move, passing Jack Doohan outside the track limits. It was unnecessary. He had the pace, and he didn't need to take that risk. The stewards handed him a 10-second penalty that ultimately ruined any chance of recovering. Despite catching up to Hadjar late in the race and finishing just a second behind him, Lawson dropped behind Alonso after serving his time. It was another case of poor timing and ineffective execution in the key moments. Moments that, in today's race, were everything. Fernando Alonso, meanwhile, continued to perform miracles in green. This is becoming routine. After a blistering start that saw him climb to P10 almost instantly, his progress was short-lived. Hadjar blew past him in the MR25, and Lawson followed shortly after. The Aston Martin simply didn't have the speed to defend. Alonso tried an early stop, diving into the pits in an attempt to undercut the field, which forced him to overtake slower cars later in the race. One of those was Bortolito, and their battle was tense, but with a tire advantage, Alonso eventually made it stick. Add in Lawson's penalty, and the Spaniard came within touching distance of the points. That alone was more than the AMR25 deserved on this circuit. Fernando had to treat the whole second half of the race like a qualifying session, pushing to the absolute limit on every lap. It's a shame that such an effort didn't earn him a single point. But that's where Aston Martin is now. On the other side of the garage, Lance Stroll was completely absent from the battle. Starting on hard tires, his strategy in theory made sense. It was built to benefit from a safety car. But it never arrived. When he finally pitted for mediums, his pace was so poor that the only position he gained was over Bortolito. He ended the day second to last. According to Pedro Dalla Rosa, the next upgrades for Aston Martin won't arrive until Imola. They desperately need them. Elsewhere, Haas experimented with multiple strategies, trying to breathe life into the VF25, but with minimal reward. It was Racing Bulls who fared better. Fermin Aldeguer gained the 2 positions left open by retirements, but beyond that, he never posed a threat. His conventional strategy, mediums to hards, didn't allow him to challenge anyone ahead. He was out of reach of the midfield leaders and too fast for the backmarkers, trapped in a performance no man's land. Esteban Ocon, taking a gamble under the early safety car, switched to hard tires in an effort to go to the end. But it became a war of attrition. By the final lap, he was crawling, clocking times over 8 seconds slower than Behrman. He let the leaders pass without resistance and limped to the finish line, having made up 5 positions from where he started, but never coming close to the top 10. It was a survival run, not a race. Nico Hülkenberg opted for an alternative plan with Sauber, starting on hards, but the lack of race pace made any strategy irrelevant. As always with Sauber, there was no real opportunity. They had more strategic awareness than Stroll's side of the Aston garage and managed to snatch a position late in the race, but it only helped them escape the embarrassment of finishing dead last. The end result was still disappointing. Gabriel Bortolito finished last. He was on the same strategy as Ocon, aiming to profit from the safety car. But after missing both key phases of the race, he was never in contention. The FW47 punished him all afternoon. On a circuit that demands rhythm and confidence, Bortolito appeared completely disconnected from the car. His drive became more of a survival test than a competition. By the end, he was dragging the car across the line, utterly spent. Still, he gained some experience defending and managing tires, but it was a brutal weekend for the Brazilian, who never found his footing. Even in qualifying, there had been potential to do more, an opportunity wasted that translated into a joyless race with no path forward. And then there's Alpine. Their entire race collapsed in the opening lap. Pierre Gasly, the only driver with a real shot at scoring points for the French outfit, was taken out in a collision with Tsunoda. It wasn't his fault. Gasly had already completed a brilliant overtake around the outside, but Jeddah's unforgiving layout bit hard. It was over in an instant. With Gasly gone, Alpine had nothing left, because the other car wasn't just ineffective. It was invisible. Jack Doohan's performance was dreadful. He had no pace, no tire management. Alpine tried to copy Ocon's strategy, pitting under the safety car, fitting hards, and hoping to ride out the remaining 49 laps with minimal degradation. It was a shortcut, a desperate gamble. But as always, strategy means nothing if the car isn't fast enough to make it work. And this Alpine was dead slow. Doohan couldn't handle the tires and had to pit again for another set of hards. Even then, he suffered massively in the final stint. His lap times were abysmal. He barely managed to pass Bortolito, the only driver behind him, who was himself barely circulating by that point. For Doohan, this wasn't just another bad race. This was a rock-bottom moment. It's especially painful when you consider that Alpine believes this A525 has the potential to fight for points. But when Gasly is eliminated, and Doohan is struggling just to stay on track, they're effectively racing with only one car. That's not sustainable. That's not a midfield team. That's a team in crisis. Meanwhile, teams like Williams are executing cleanly with both cars, maximizing every opportunity, and pulling ahead in both points and confidence. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Alpine is in danger of being left behind entirely, not just in standings, but in spirit. Let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.